Coming up, the New York Football Giants keep right on not surprising us. Losing on Sunday to the Jets, we break down what was a disappointing loss, if most of the responsibility falls on the head of Coach Brian Daboll, and then the trade deadline. Who's staying, who's going, and how much will we judge Joe Schoen for the decisions that he makes? That's right. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your hosts. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. Over there, Andrew Makowitz. And before we get to what really is the most important news of the day, the trade deadline, what this team should do, players that we reasonably think the Giants could move, and what they can get in return. Andy, classic Giants performance yesterday against the Jets.
How do we lose that game? Like how? Like I know we were
dedication, focus, drive.
I know we were bad enough on offense to lose the game. Sure, you know what I mean? Like that part of it I get. It's more like how on earth are we winning that game? You know, all the statistical likelihoods of us winning, 99.9% chance probability to win the game with under a minute to go, and the Giants find a way to lose. It is maddening. It is frustrating. And it ultimately ends the Giants season in week 8, right? Like, I don't know if there's any other way to describe it.
Oh no, listen, and I think this is a classic moment where as soon as the Giants lose that game, I go, I knew I should have just said the Giants season was over every single week, consistently for the last 4 weeks. But you buy in, you get the second win, you say, well, you could be 3-5, and Daniel Jones could come back, and he's got a herniated disc, and there's all kinds of problems there too. But it's like, all these things happen, and then once the final whistle goes, you go, right. Because it's still the same problems. The defense has played well. We know that. Throughout the course of this game, isolated, they played incredibly well. They took Zach Wilson, a young quarterback who hasn't really shown that he's capable of leading a team to consistent victories, and said, yeah, we're going to mess with you. But guess what? One play, one drop-off pass for a 50-yard touchdown run, essentially, for Breece Hall, like that was the difference in this game. And once Tyrod Taylor goes down, there's no chance to move this football. Tommy DeVito isn't going to be throwing this thing around the field, and you're just trying to bleed this clock out. And I saw it on that the last couple of drives before overtime. You knew, right? Because it was, sorry, you can only hold off a team so long. A couple of good runs from Zach Wilson here, a good pass catch there, 2 missed tackles. None of these things are about the defense being bad, by the way. It's just the reality of football. And you go, yeah, well, what do you think is going to happen? It's a tie ball game and you're going to overtime. No chance that this team is going to be able to manufacture a win here, even if they got the ball first. You can give me any other comments you want here, but really it comes down to what I think fans were dialed in on was that Brian Daboll is the reason that this team lost this game.
100%. I am with everyone on this falling on the shoulders of Brian Daboll, Mike Kafka, coaching staff, Joe Schoen, GM. This is a front office loss for the Giants because the defense played well enough.
That's not Brian Daboll then.
Well, it's coaching and players. I kind of put them in the same bucket. We gave them both high praise when people looked good last year and he got coach of the year and GM Joe Schoen was looking good. This was a failure on both Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, and I'll explain why. First is, it's not like Tyrod Taylor hasn't gotten hurt before in his career, right? And so the backup plan was going to be Tommy DeVito, I guess. He's been in the building for the last few weeks. There was the possibility that Tyrod Taylor could have gotten hurt. And that was our backup plan, was having Tommy DeVito out there who looked like he wasn't. It was like the coaches looked at him and said, if you throw a pass, we will escort you out of MetLife Stadium immediately.
Syracuse alum.
Yeah, well, Syracuse for 3 years, then Illinois. It depends on if they got the win. He was definitely a Syracuse alumni. If they get the loss, it was definitely like Illinois team, But Adam, you have a -9 passing yards, the least since 1977. -9 passing yards. I'm very glad that we can't blame this on Daniel Jones because he wasn't actually playing today. -9 passing yards, Adam. It's crazy to me because I felt the exact same way that you did, where I looked around the room and I'm like, oh, Brian Daboll just wants to kick 3 field goals and try to get out of here with a 7-9 win. Like that's what he was trying to do. But
Mhm,
man, you need to be prepared to be able to throw the ball. And the craziest part is both things can be true. And then I'll kind of turn it back over after my diatribe.
mhm.
99.9% chance to win the game means that he had them in a position to win the game. However, the
Mhm.
execution and how we got there is what I think everyone's really frustrated about. And the Giants end up losing this game in the most confounding way ever. I personally am more frustrated with trying to kick the field goal on 4th and 1 at the end of the game rather than handing the ball off to Saquon Barkley to say, get me 1 yard to win the game. That to me was the biggest Brian Daboll coaching error of the game.
Yeah, listen, it's funny because okay, Graham Gano is healthy enough to play. That's what the medical staff told you, right? So
Apparently.
you're going to use right. And by the way, medical staff could be a big issue here, right? Because maybe you should have said 2 weeks ago, because it's not like Graham Gano has just started looking like he's been hurting. It's been for weeks now. So you could have said, hey, this guy's not healthy enough. You need to bring somebody else in here. And those were 40-ish yard field goals, a little bit more. So, by NFL standards today, those are chip shots in a lot of ways. And for Graham Gano, in a lot of ways, those are chip shots. So, they tell you he's healthy. Now, that's mistake number one from the medical staff. Then after the first missed field goal, if you're Brian Daboll, you got to go over and say, like, hey, like, are you healthy enough? Hey, someone tell me, is he good enough to make these kicks? I think you keep getting the same feedback. The 4th and 1, initially, I would say, like, hey, he's there. He allegedly healthy, kicked the field goal. There's 6 points on the board there that the Giants do not score in the course of this game. That dramatically changes things. Now, the other side of it would have been one of two things. The going for it, I'm fine with. If you say you want to go for it because the defense has played so well and you want to trust them to stop them right there, great. I also think the other thing to do, which unfortunately for the Scottish Hammer, he did not have a great game punting. He shanked one late there, which created a short field as well. But you could have said, let's punt it and pin them back. Not unlike what the Jets were doing to the Giants all game long. Why don't you take it from your 2? Why don't you take it from your 1 and go the length of the football field here, right? Like these opportunities to do something different were certainly there. And the only reason why I push back on going for it is because it's not like Saquon Barkley and this offensive line were lighting it up with consistency. It was one of the better performances overall because we're going to run the ball 36 times. So eventually we're going to make some headway here. I do question that part of it. The only thing I don't question in terms of the QB play is there's not a lot of NFL teams that can afford to have their starting quarterback get injured, maybe one of the better backup quarterbacks in the league come into play, and then have a plan in place for him to get injured as well. Now, should Tommy DeVito be the guy? We can all make a strong case, one of two things. Either no, he shouldn't, or if he is, then you have to maybe live with the fact, again, to the entire time that he's in there, I don't care about him having to throw. But once you know you're going to overtime, I think you need to come in with something a little bit more inspired than, well, maybe we'll try to, we saw the passes, right? We're going to throw the ball 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage and see if Saquon can do something. Like, I think at some point you probably have to say, in overtime, we can't win this game unless we can get a passing play together here. And that, I think, would have been acknowledged on all sides afterwards. That was the only way to get to the win, right? 99.9% chance to win. If we can throw the ball at all, it felt inevitable that the Jets were going to get that one.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. At some point, I was thinking to myself, why aren't we just doing the Wildcat? Like, why don't we just have Saquon take direct snaps? It feels like a waste of time having Tommy DeVito if he's not going to throw the ball, right?
And by the way, you saw that too, though. It's like the Wildcat you saw. Saquon, but they ran a couple times. They shifted Tommy DeVito over. Saquon's like, give me the ball. The line fell apart. Saquon Barkley got eaten alive 4 yards. It's like, okay, so it's just this is where, because we'll grind this game and this loss into a fine powder. This is where you could just feel it. This is what this was. It was the Giants' collective fan base feeling the season slipping away, understanding even in the moment when Tyrod went down that, hey, even one more game next week before we think that Daniel Jones could come back, that's going to be a loss. Like you knew it was ending. That's what all this is. And it doesn't mean that there isn't responsibility, and we'll talk about it throughout the course of the week. But that's what this was. It was the end of the season. The Giants fall to 2-6, and now we turn our attention to what happens next here. And you and I think, are going to, well, we're going to agree and disagree. I'm always going to go back to the Saquon Barkley piece. It's not about him as a player. It's about this team and how it functions overall. But the Giants are in 4th position right now on Tankathon for the NFL draft, behind only the Cardinals, the Panthers, who won a game, and the Chicago Bears. That Carolina Panthers pick is going to go to Chicago as well. They have every reason to try to win games down the stretch. The Giants are 4th at 2-6. they can get a top 3 pick. They might be able to get a top 2 pick in the upcoming draft. They need to not only look at it as this season being over, but what they can accomplish in the draft ahead.
Uh, Listen, I think you and I are somewhat on the same page. Now, you mentioned the trade deadline fast approaching. Tomorrow, I believe at 4 p.m.
That's right.
is when it's all done. Adam, the Giants need to think about this in an 18 to 24 month time horizon and not necessarily the next 6 month time horizon.
That's
They need
right.
to be saying, who do we plan on having us participate and play in snaps next season? If we don't intend on them being here, then they should be immediately evaluated to see what trade compensation you can get. You mentioned there's quite a few different guys, and it's frustrating because the defense has been playing well. But you look at a guy like Leonard Williams, you look at a guy like Xavier McKinney that are playing well, that have value. The Giants should be immediately finding out what the trade value is of each of these players. And if it's anything more than like a 5th round pick, it's something that the Giants need to consider as they think about the rebuild. Because to your point, the Giants are not knocking off 9 straight wins to finish the season. It's just not going to happen. And so they've dug themselves in such a far hole that really you need to be thinking about, how do we put ourselves in position to compete next year, not necessarily for the rest of this season.
Yeah, and listen, there were teams we talked about that were ahead of the Giants. It's laughable to say in the wild card stretch here that went ahead and lost some games, won some games. So that muddled out this process here behind the Giants as well. We talk about the path ahead, the New Orleans Saints being one of them that got a win here and moved themselves out of the Giants' way. Also, you mentioned it's interesting to me because I'm very excited to hear you on this side of the ledger here, and I wasn't surprised about mentioning a guy like Leonard Williams. I think Adoree Jackson, he's the big name that comes to mind here too. Frankly, that penalty. There's a world where Adoree Jackson is as all a lot of quarterbacks do. 30 plus years old, it starts to turn. Now, do I think he can be really valuable for a high level team? Yes, and playing at a depth, certainly. And there's a lot of teams that would be interested. I think you have to look at him and say, okay, what is a reasonable offer here? You mentioned it too about the pick value. 4th round, if that's available for any of these guys, 5th round. At some point, what we have to remember too, and I think your timeline is correct. When we go not just in the next year's draft, well, I can take my 4th round pick and an extra 5th round pick and get myself to the back of the 3rd round, maybe, right? Because we're going to have a high pick in all of our rounds. So it's not just about saying like, oh, what are you going to get in the 5th round? What are you getting in the 6th round? No. It's what can I combine these picks into and move up the board to target players that I want. So I think the Giants have to look at that. I don't think we'll talk in a second about who we think really is going to go here. The other one's Paris Campbell, obviously, is a low-level guy. And there's just to note on that, there's been samples like this in past years. You're talking about swapping picks with a team. Like that's what we're talking about. And they're still going to owe him money, a little north of like $1.5, $1.6 million this year. That creates a problem for another team. Another team is not saying, oh, we'll take this guy that you gave over $4 million to in the offseason. We're not just going to take him off your hands. So there's going to be an issue there for the Giants potentially too. But the other thing is, you mentioned the bigger picture. If we talk about 12 to 18 months from now, when you're midway through, getting into next season and midway through next year, who are the other guys on this roster that you're going to say, oh, maybe we should have done it already, and that are going to maybe have diminished value next year? Guess what? Yes, Saquon Barkley is one of those guys, and we don't have to belabor it because it doesn't sound like the Giants are going to be interested in moving him.
I mean, imagine what yesterday looks like without Saquon Barkley. Like he was the only thing that
For
functioned for
sure.
the offense at all, right?
Yeah.
And they just kept trotting him out there, handing the ball off to him 38 times. It's like they had -9 passing yards. Like
And
it's
by the
even
way, though,
scarier.
and that's great, but guess what? Like, I feel terrible for Saquon Barkley, but he can't. You know what I mean? Like, this can't be like we're gonna keep him. We're gonna pay him. Why? I don't know, because he sacrificed his body for us one Sunday, in late October against the Jets because our team was miserable. Like, and that can't be the sentimentality that happens here.
No, I mean, we talked about it before. I said that there
Yeah,
was
yeah.
little zero. Basically, I thought there was a 0 chance that they were going to trade Saquon Barkley. Then the team even came out and said there is no chance that we are trading him. And you'd like to romanticize it and say like it's because everyone loves each other and kumbaya. But Adam, the whole idea was the Giants can get a 3rd round compensatory pick if they keep him for the rest of the season. A team would have to give them more in order for them to move him now, and it would also, to your point, like bring in the idea of the front office getting right into the crosshairs of all these fans that are like, the only guy that's doing anything right now is Saquon Barkley, and you're shipping him out. He's a guy that said he wanted to be a Giant forever. Like, what are we doing? So there's, the the quarter public
Giants fans
opinion
would
piece.
say, "Thank you, Saquon. Enjoy your journey in football elsewhere. You deserve it." Nobody should have to have themselves wither on the vine of the New York Football Giants roster right now.
I listen. I get it. It's just a whole host of factors, but
Of
most
course.
importantly, the Giants will get more trade compensation if they hold on to him than if they were to ship him out, which is the reason behind this.
Allegedly, we'll
Listen,
get into that another day.
yeah, but the issue, Adam, and I think you're skirting around the discussion point, and
Mhm.
I'm sure that this is where you want to have it. If you're talking about the next 12 to 18 months, and you're talking about having a top 5 pick, the question becomes: has the team bottomed out so bad that we need to click the reset button on everything altogether and maybe use that first round draft pick on a quarterback? Or are there other areas that the team can say, we desperately need a right tackle, or we desperately need a weapon on the outside? That complementing Daniel Jones is better than insert Drake May here and hope that, the rebuild starts immediately.
Yeah, I think the way that you have to look at this, and you're right, it's about how far have you fallen. Now, the difference is saying, do I think that Daniel Jones with a healthy offensive line and complement of weapons? So I think that we've talked about this all season long, all the last 2 years, last 3 years, last 4 years, last 5 years. Like this is all we talk about is what could Daniel Jones be? At some point, you have to look at two things. One, the threshold of where is Daniel Jones in his career? Where are these injuries? And what does it mean going forward for this team? Because, okay, you have the 2 year out, and then it's going to be 4 years. And it's going to be some significant money that'll probably fall by the wayside relative to other QBs as contracts come up. But is this QB class one of the best looks you're going to get over the next couple of years to bring in a quarterback? And if you think that, oh, if we bring in another offensive lineman, if we bring in a number one wide receiver and a couple other moves here, can we be a competitive team? Great. Are we going to be a deep playoff team? Are we going to be a winning playoff team? Because if not, then all you're doing is taking yourself out of the ability to go get that quarterback. Right now, the Giants are in a spot to be able to get a quarterback and not have to spend the extra capital to get there. That's what this comes down to. And if we don't think that Daniel Jones is coming back until week 10 at the earliest, at least that's what's alleged. So there's another loss on the docket here. I don't know what they're going to do next week. Tyrod Taylor stayed overnight after having his rib injury. We'll see what comes of it. But who are you going to go get anyway? Like, even if you wanted somebody better, who's coming in and you're going to go and take on a very strong Saints defense? So they're going to be 2-7. And then you're going to play the Cowboys. Even if Daniel Jones is back and healthy, you could be 2-8. And then you have 2 more meetings at the end of the year with the Eagles. And you have the Commander, like all these things, man. Like the path right now is there to keep yourself as a top 3, top 4 at worst draft pick. You're a top 4 draft pick right now. You cannot get any worse in that positioning over the remainder of the year. And then it keeps your options open. Because guess what? Last thing on my diatribe, Andy, is even if you decided that Daniel Jones is still the guy for you, and we believe that we only are a couple moves away, then guess what? You have a top 3 pick that you can have people begging you for because they want to go get their quarterback. And you could fill out your roster this year. You can get more draft picks. You can also probably get a first round pick the year after that maybe still ends up being a top 5 or top 10. We could be right back where Joe Schoen was in year 1. I have 2 top 10 picks. Only this time around, I'm going into the draft for my quarterback. I'm not looking to build things out. It feels like Groundhog's Day, man. Like at some point, no matter what you think about individual players or what could be, the sample size is telling us that this team is further than closer. And the injuries and all this other stuff, it can't all just be what an unlucky year. Oh, shucks. You're among one of the worst teams in the league. Like there's reasons for that beyond bad luck and injuries.
Well, so a couple things. One, the next game that the Giants play is against the Las Vegas Raiders, which they look like they're
I
trying
said
to
Saints.
bottom
Yeah,
out
sorry, Raiders.
as
Yeah.
well. And so, like, that is a winnable game if you have a competent quarterback back there that can actually throw a ball. I don't know where the Giants go. Is Daniel Jones ready yet? Is Tyrod still not at the hospital? So to presume that he's going to play, or are you going to say, all right, it is Tommy DeVito. We're going to build upon what we just started with. I honestly don't know where they're going to go with that. I I understand what you're saying. The weird thing though, Adam, is like I actually don't think that this team is that much different than the playoff team, the team that won a playoff game a year ago. But and the reason why I'll just say this: last year the Giants got all the breaks. When a ball could bounce one way, it went the Giants' way. Right? Think
Mhm.
about the Tennessee Titans opening game. The miss a field goal at the end where they could have made it, and then the Giants lose that game. The Giants are double digits to both the Packers and the Ravens in the fourth quarter, and they come back and win both of those games. It felt like the ball was bouncing the right direction for the Giants, and they won a playoff game. They were one of the few teams remaining at the end in the playoffs. This year, things don't look the same way. You have, the game yesterday was one that the Giants should have won. You look at the Buffalo game where the Giants have the ball on the goal line with a chance to win the game. That's two games where the ball just didn't bounce the correct way, where it did, last year. And so right now, I think we can both say, like, on a good day, this is a fringe playoff team. They could potentially win a playoff game. On their worst day, they have a top 5 draft pick. And it's because they don't have all of the talent that they need on the offensive side of the ball. They just do not. And so that's the hard part. When we talk about, like, how far away are we? How far away are we from what? Are you talking about perennial Super Bowl contender? Are you talking about making the playoffs? Are you talking about being competitive in every game? Like, what is the goal that the Giants are looking to accomplish here?
But that matters. That almost works against your idea that, hey, they're a fringe playoff team and they're just these couple of pieces away potentially, because that is the point. Like, are you building towards being a perennial Super Bowl contender? Right now, I know I'm not. You're not.
I'm asking hypothetically.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know the answer. Are you happy with just trying to be a 9-8 team, sneaking in the playoffs, and hoping that you recreate what Eli Manning and that defense was able to do, or are you thinking about creating a solid foundation that says we can stack bricks up, and this team will not be an 8-win team; it'll be an 11-win team, a 12-win team? Like, where's the foundational pieces here to say that we can consistently win double-digit games? That's the question.
And that's what the problem is, because you don't know 100% that Daniel Jones is the quarterback that can be one of the foundational pieces of that process. You know that Saquon Barkley is that level of talent, but you don't know over the next 1, 2, and 3 years that he's going to remain that level of talent. Darren Waller, by the way, little footnote, he got injured in yesterday's game as well. And that was the concern about when you went out and got him, right? Is that, hey, this is a guy that, yes, when on the field and healthy, very talented, but can he stay healthy and on the field? So now all of a sudden you're looking at him and saying, yeah, okay, like, we know that he's good, but he's not younger next year. Matter of fact, he's only going to be older, guys. That's how time works. And the injuries are probably going to only be more concerning with him. So now you have some of your best players, in theory, especially on the offensive side, are guys that have the biggest question marks about them. And the last thing, like, I'll note, I don't know if I said this before on the episode, on one of our episodes, but again, you said about being a fringe playoff team, and I think that they are a fringe playoff team, but they're not a deep playoff run team right now. I don't think they're bottom of the barrel as they look this year. You mentioned the unlucky bounce of the football, but remember too, like, go back to last season when you beat Houston in week 10. After that game, you lost to Detroit, to Dallas, you tied Washington, lost to Philadelphia, got a win against Washington and Indianapolis over the last few weeks of the season, and lost to Minnesota and Philadelphia again. So you lost 5 games. You were a 3-5-1 team over the remainder of your season, including that Houston game. Fast forward to this year, it doesn't look like it's gone in the right direction. So when we say last season, some lucky bounces, maybe they got some breaks, week 1 against the Tennessee Titans, going for it, getting the win. Okay, that might have been the ceiling of the team currently, which was that's a fringe playoff team. They snuck in there because of the tie. There's a world where they just missed the playoffs last year, right? Where they were 9-8 and not good enough. So that's my painful reality is you narrowly got to the playoffs last year, but maybe you were more of an almost playoff team last season. Then by happenstance and what unfolded this year, now you're nowhere near being a playoff team. So if you go into next season and by week 7, week 8, we're sitting here having the same conversation, what should they do with key players? Who do we want to talk about? Should they be on the trade block? That's what you cannot afford to do. And it does fall to Joe Schoen. It falls to Joe Schoen and what will be year 3 for him in saying, what is this team? And if you did not believe ultimately that Daniel Jones was more than a short-term stopgap for you, then I think we will reflect back on, why bother signing that contract, even just for 2 years? We get it. If someone's got to play quarterback, yes. And there's a lot of cheaper people that could have done it. I'm watching Josh Dobbs be serviceable while that team loses games in Arizona. I'm watching Gardner Minshew fill in for an injured Anthony Richardson with the Colts and not really be concerned about what, like, there were better options and none of them cost you $40 million.
Yeah, I mean, Adam, we talked about this before with Joe Schoen specifically, and it's around some of the decisions that he's making. Obviously, when the team isn't performing well anymore, or you're not getting those breaks, everything gets put under the microscope. We talk about the Darren Waller move. He's had injuries in his career that have kept him off the field consistently for Las Vegas. And guess what? It happened again. And that's the reason why he was available for a trade to begin with. And as you mentioned, he's only going to get older and he's only going to be more injured, right?
And by the way, if healthy, I'd be talking about saying they should try to flip him in season after half a year on the roster. It would have made all the sense in the world, but you can't do that now if it's anything serious, excuse me.
Yeah, and the other piece about Joe Schoen, and we mentioned this before about Daniel Jones. When Joe Schoen took over, he declined Daniel Jones's fifth-year option. He said,
Yes.
"I am not going to take this $22 million contract. I want to see Daniel Jones prove it." Joe Schoen was the one that told us that he didn't know if Daniel Jones was the long-term answer. Then Daniel Jones plays the best year of his career last year, right? And all of a sudden, now Joe Schoen is telling us, I believe he's a $40 million a year quarterback. He's the one that's telling us this. Now, the teams look like they've been in shambles for the first 5 to 7 games of the season. Everyone is even questioning like whether Tyrod makes more sense than Daniel Jones. Like, that's how far we've fallen. Now, are we saying Joe Schoen is swinging the pendulum back and he's going to say, maybe we should go get a quarterback? Maybe we should he needs to be consistent as well in what his messaging is, because it went from we don't know if Daniel Jones is the answer to Daniel Jones is the guy. Now there's all these question marks. But to your point, it just feels like, what is the identity of this team
Yeah.
moving forward? I
Yeah.
honestly don't know, and we have 24 hours to figure out who's going to be around for the Giants to shape that identity. When you're talking about tough times, 2 wins on the season, looking like you're getting a likely top 5 pick in the draft. Like, who's going to keep that locker room together? We're going to find out in one day's time which leaders are still going to be there and who's not.
And honestly, too, on the Saquon Barkley piece, he probably is one of the guys that will keep the locker room together, right? Like that's who he is by nature. And also, you're going to put him out there to run the ball 30 plus times a game and get absolutely physically destroyed in a meaningless season. Like you're diminishing your own asset. You know what I mean? Going to next year, it'll be like he gets an injury in week 2. You go, well, yeah, when you run the guy 35 times a game for 8 weeks in a season where you were a top 5 pick, this can be what happens. I mean, this is going to be fake and injury territory. This is going to be, oh, it's weird. A hamstring just flared up for Saquon Barkley. Likewise for any of these guys. Andrew Thomas, is he coming back to hamstring? Is he healthy enough? He's been back at practice. Like, at some point, you're going to be trying to nurse your way to the finish line. And how are you going to ask the defensive players on this team to keep going out there and putting in performances like they have for the last few weeks and say, no, it's okay. You, Kayvon Thibodeau, you keep giving us your all. Bobby Okereke, you keep giving us your all. Xavier, you give us your all. Well, not Saquon Barkley, though. He's a running back. We know a devalued position in the NFL, but we can't risk him. Or Daniel Jones. We're not going to risk bringing him back too soon. It's just, I think that this thing is going to be headed for a very ugly conversation week over week if the Giants don't have a viable quarterback and if they don't have a way to be competitive in games. They're going for historic low numbers in scoring offense this season. Like, you got outscored by the Jets. I mean, what else are we supposed to say? The bottom line is, I'll rattle it off real quick here. They have a laundry list of players, some of which who are already injured. Guys that are expiring this season for the Giants, and I mean, it is a lengthy list. Isaiah Hodgins, Wyatt Davis, Deion Jackson, they just brought in, so you wouldn't think he's going anywhere. Tyree Phillips just brought in. But you also have guys like Justin Pugh. That's actually not as, that could be kind of interesting here if the Giants want to be really smart, and he's looked pretty solid, and you're not going to have a good quarterback playing on this line anyway. You have guys like Bobby McCain, I think is interesting. Sterling Shepard doesn't have any value in this league. Ward, maybe. Matt Breida, maybe. Carter Coughlin, Nick McLeod, there are names here, Andy. Darnay Holmes. There are names of guys that may not fetch you much of anything, but can get you something. And the real question is just going to be, you need to field a roster. So how many guys can you reasonably shed and then still be ready to go out there on Sundays at the highest level? You mentioned them. Do you think that Adoree Jackson, Leonard Williams, or Xavier McKinney are going anywhere tomorrow by the deadline?
Yes, I do. And I
Yes.
hope that Joe Schoen makes that decision, because we need to be able to get trade value. Adoree Jackson will not be on this team past this season regardless, in my
Yep.
opinion. So if there is value, if a contending team wants to give you a later round pick for him, I think you need to. You talk about Xavier McKinney. He wanted a contract. The Giants didn't give it to him. He got
Yep.
upset and frustrated about it. Did the Giants not give it to him because they don't see him in their future plans? If that is the case, Adam, they need to look at trade compensation for him. Everything should be on the table. I honestly think that there's only about 5 guys on this entire roster where you kind of just say, Well, they're foundational to what we're trying to build. So like
Yep.
like a guy like Andrew Thomas, a guy like Kayvon Thibodeau, a guy like Bobby Okereke, Dexter Lawrence, those guys are going to be the reason why you're going to come out and on the
Yes.
upswing
Yes.
eventually at some point. So like those guys here to stay for good. Everyone else, find out what the trade compensation is going to be, and let's get some numbers and put our heads together and see what the future looks like.
Got to be open phone lines, hopefully, for Big Blue. It's not because we want it to be. It's just what it should be, what it needs to be when you are a team that is now 2-6 and staring down the barrel of a rough back half of the season. We'll come in tomorrow, maybe even do a little live in the afternoon because the countdown to the deadline is going to be interesting. I'd like to think that the Giants are on the phones and making decisions a little bit sooner than that. But we'll cover all of it. And if there's anything else, I guess, to take away from this Jets loss, we'll certainly talk about it. But I don't think we need to. We can just move on. Until next time, you get over on YouTube at One Giant Podcast, on Twitter at One Giant Podcast, at AndyMac214, and at Adam Armbrecht. Go check out on substack.com/One Giant Podcast, where Andy's putting out his bets of the week. Did not land on the Jalen Hyde anytime touchdown, but you did get I think you got a couple of hits in there with Saquon Barkley, if not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, it was a tough one. Jalen Hyatt, when the Giants didn't even start, when they stopped attempting passes in the game, that's when I knew that wager didn't look too good. That they could have given you whatever odds. They could have given you $1 million to one, and it
That's right.
was never going to hit because they didn't want to throw the ball. But yeah, listen, I said that they were giving Saquon the ball quite a bit. Said take his over of yards of 72. He blew past that with the 38 carries that he had. But hopefully we'll get back out there with some other winners for the listeners.
You better believe it. Do all those great things. And until next time, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.
All right, I'm just going to re-hit this intro real quick because Giant singing didn't turn out to be as easy to say as I thought it would.